Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the standard dialogue framework. Um, this was something we introduced in Roku OS in the 10.0 release, and we made some small improvements in the 10.5 release. So we're going to be going over the original old dialogue classes and show you how they work with the new standard dialogue classes. We're going to talk a little bit about customizing the colors using the palette. And then we're going to finish with an example of how you can create a custom dialogue, which was not something you could do with the original dialogue classes. Here's the QR code to get to the Slido page where you can ask questions. We'll put this up again at the end of the presentation as well. Jeff, you want to start here?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So here's brief overview of what we call the Dialog Standardization project and a little bit about why we took on this effort. Our goals were to standardize the look and layout of the dialogues. That it includes everything like spacing, margins, colors, and some of the behaviors, scrolling behaviors, button behaviors. Even internally, as our teams were growing, we were having difficulty making, adding enough flexibility so that we could have a consistent look and feel. So that's what this project was all about. In addition to internally allowing our color system to be consistent, we also created palettes for our developers to use so that they could customize the look and feel of the dialogues to match their channel's brand if desired. And again, this is all in the name of consistency. One thing, when things look and behave the same across any platform, it just adds to a more professional experience.
Okay, so similar to the keywords that I talked about yesterday, we took the original dialogue classes and created new standard dialogue classes that have pretty much the same functionality, and in most cases, the same sort of interfaces. So that to change from the old to the new requires a little more than just changing the name from dialogue to standard message dialogue in your channels. So here we see the original dialogue class over on the left and the new equivalent standard message dialogue on the right. You'll notice that both of them kind of have these gray palettes. They're a little bit different. These are what you'll get by default if you just use the dialogues out of the box. The interfaces are pretty much the same. You can set a message. You can have a bulleted list or a numbered list. You can have some more messages below the list and some buttons at the bottom. The second one of our original classes was called Progress Dialog. We call this the indeterminate dialog, where the spinner just spins. On the right, you'll see the equivalent standard progress dialog. And at the bottom, if you actually don't set a title on the standard progress dialog, you'll get this kind of smaller mini waiting dialog. The third original class was called the keyboard dialog. The equivalent is the standard keyboard dialog. This is actually using the new dynamic keyboard node, which supports voice entry and some other things that we've talked about yesterday. And finally, we had the pin dialog. The equivalent is the standard pin pad dialog. And again, this is using the dynamic pin pad element, which supports voice entry. In the old dialogues, we would customize things by setting fields, like there was a title color field and things, but the new dialogues support this concept of a palette.
Yeah, and the palette, the idea behind the palette is just to make it simple to get a custom look just by modifying a few of these color names within the palette. So you can obviously set the background color by using that top field there. And then we try to make it simple to customize the color of any iconography or text as as just two different entries, and those will uniformly change the colors. In this example, you can see the text within the keyboard and the mic icon and some of these modifier keys that Jim is pointing to there. All using the item color or the text color. So typically those you want to keep the same value. And then anytime we allow customization of the default elements, you also need to customize the focus color itself, which is this large lighter blue rectangle there. And then the focus item color would be the icon or text that sits on top of that focus element. Then we added a few things specific. Actually, so we did add the secondary text color, which is the next thing. So anytime you want to add hierarchy to the information in your dialogue, it's good to have a secondary text color too. You can tell the difference there between the title of the dialogue and then this smaller text below it. Just that hierarchy helps digest the information of a dialogue. And then added a few additional items for the input field color, which is the text input field that getting pointed to there, and as well as the keyboard color. So this would just be the color of the keys themselves, which is this kind of middle blue color there in the center. Final color is the footprint color. So this is something that we do down at the bottom. Anytime we have a button that can take focus, we introduce this footprint element to indicate to the user that they can move focus to that item. Yeah, so with those few customizations, you should be able to get a pretty unique look to your dialogues.
Yeah, and to set this up, we show how to do this on the right. You create a node called an RSG palette. You assign it an associative array of the color names and the color values. And then you can assign the palette either to an individual dialogue, which is what's being done here. But the more common case is you would set up a dialogue for your whole channel and assign it to the scene, and then automatically all of your dialogues would use that same palette. So you can set it up once, and everything will just pick up that same palette value. So one of the advantages of the new standard dialogue framework is that you can create your own dialogues. So in addition to the 4 built-in ones, the message dialogue, the progress dialogue, the keyboard and pen pad dialogue, if you need to have a dialogue with a different body or something different about it, you can build it yourself out of smaller level pieces. So this slide shows that the dialogues actually consist of 3 main areas: a title area at the top, a button area at the bottom, and in the middle, a content area. And those content areas can contain what we call items. So in this case, there's a text item, which is just a block of text, and a bullet text item, which is a bulleted or numbered list. There's other items that we'll be covering soon as well. So if you need a dialogue that doesn't fall into the capabilities of the 4 built-in ones, you can pretty easily create your own dialogue, and it'll let you have a lot more flexibility in what you show in your dialogues. So there actually is a base class for the areas, and the title area, content area, and button area are all derived from that. The title area, in addition to having just a single string, you can also add an icon to the left of the string and another string over to the right. So it provides you more capability than the built-in dialog classes do as well. The content area, as I said, it contains a sequence of items. All of those items are derived from a class called Standard Dialog Item Base. The ones that are available are the text item, which is a block of text. So if you want 2 paragraphs of text, you should use 2 text items, and we'll automatically leave space between the 2. There's a bullet text item, which is a list. There's a graphic item, which lets you show a bitmap with a caption, and there's some flexibility about where the caption appears relative to the image. There's a keyboard item, which lets you show either the full alphanumeric keyboard or the pin pad. There's a progress item, which is just the infinite spinner, and the determinate progress item, which lets you show percentage completion of some operation. Yeah.
I can talk about this one. So yeah, anytime the content area extends beyond the max height of the dialog, that entire content block will scroll. Yeah, I don't know if you have more to say about it.
Yes, I mean, so this is just automatic behavior. If you put in more content items that'll fit, more items in your content area that will fit, the framework will actually just add the scroll bar so that the people can scroll up and down. Actually, the same thing happens with the buttons. If there's more buttons that will fit, there's also a scrolling behavior built in there automatically. And yeah, and if you put so much stuff that both the content area and the button area have to scroll, you probably should go back to your UX designer and redesign your dialog. Although it'll make the framework will make some reasonable attempt at making that work too.
So yeah, this is showing an example, and Jim can correct me if I misspeak about this, but this is just showing an example of a dialog with two content areas. And by default, if you create two content areas within the dialog, those content areas will display side by side.
And that's about it. You can have focus in one of the content areas or both, and the right thing will happen when you go left, right, it'll switch focus back and forth.
Yeah, and then I imagine both of those content areas will scroll simultaneously in the event you get crazy with your design.
Okay, and really the last thing I want to go through is how to actually create one of these custom dialogues. So I chose to make a dialog that has a graphic item and the determinate progress item because we haven't seen those in the other dialogs. Like the message dialog uses text items and bullet text items. The keyboard items are used in the standard keyboard dialog and the standard pin pad dialog. So this just shows an example of a dialog using the other two types of items that we haven't seen yet. So to do this, you create a new RSG component. You give it a name, and it's going to extend standard dialog. Then you add children to it. You see here we've added the three areas: the title area, the content area, and the button area. The order in which you specify these isn't really important. The title area will always put it at the top. The button area will always put it at the bottom. And if you have content areas, they actually will be arranged left to right in the order that they appear here. So the title area, we just have a title. Again, you could have an icon or another string over onto the right. The graphic item, you give it a URL for an image. And in this case, we've set the graphic align field to center above, which means that the graphic is centered and above the caption. Then we have this determinate progress item. So you would set that up there, but then your code would need to actually drive the percentage. So there's a field on the determinate progress item that controls the 0 to 100% value. And so you would set that based on some process that you're monitoring. And then there's a couple buttons down here at the bottom. So really, there's a lot of smarts built into the layout algorithm so that it generally does the right thing. If you don't specify a width, you'll get a dialog that has this width. If you have a dialog if you have a title that is too big to fit, we'll automatically increase the width up to some maximum, so that it's probably, up to within, 50 pixels from the size of the screen or something like that. So generally, you don't specify the width, you don't specify the height. The height will just be computed to accommodate the content that you have in the dialog. And yeah, I really don't have a whole lot more to say. It's pretty simple to create your own dialogues. And if you have a particular dialog style you use throughout your channel, you can create just one component, give it the interface that you want to, and then use that throughout your channel. Really, that's about it. So in summary, the new dialogues are kind of cleaner and they have a more standard kind of layout. It's easy to customize them using these color palettes. And the most powerful new feature is that you can create your own dialogues instead of being limited to the 4 built-in dialogues.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you, guys. So with that, I'm going to take over screen share and show the Slido questions that we've received. I preceded this with some questions that we received ahead of this presentation. So I'll start with that question. And then, of course, everybody in the audience, you're encouraged to write in your questions as we go. So the question is, do we have to convert our channels to use the new dialogues? What will happen if we don't?
Currently, there's no plans to deprecate the old dialogues. So if you don't convert your dialogues, they'll continue to work. I would encourage you to do the conversion, but I would encourage you to do it all at once so you don't end up with kind of a mismatch of the 2 different dialogue styles. And yeah, I mean, it's really up to you at this point.
Jim, I think I'll actually add a question to that. Are there performance benefits to the new dialogues?
Not really. The dialogues are not really very performance intensive.
Yeah.
Either way, they're mostly just static things that show up. So.
Right. Cool. Well, so that's the one question that we had. We'll leave the bridge open for a minute or 2 here, so folks can have an opportunity to write in their questions. Oh, look at that. Wow. Coming in fast. Whoa. Awesome. I love it, guys. This came in super fast and all at once. Okay, so Brian Lightly is asking, is it okay to use dialogue components outside of dialogues?
I'm not sure what would happen if you did that. So I don't really know. I mean, they're intended to be used within the standard dialogue.
Like maybe the keyboard component, though it's not part of the dialogue, maybe an example that can be used outside of the dialogue, right?
Sure, but then you would be using the keyboard node, not the standard dialogue keyboard item.
Awesome. The next question from Vishal is, can we change fonts for dialogue?
Yeah, currently that's not supported. I can't really comment on future plans.
Great. Chris Dwyer Perkins asks, are we able to remove the backdrop effect behind the dialogues?
I assume that means the kind of screen darkening thing that shows up. And right now there's no way to remove that.
Cool. Chris, if that's not what you were referring to, feel free to raise your hand. I'll keep an eye out for that. Maddie Adams asks, is there any way to have stylized text in line in the standard dialogue? For example, bolded phrases in a privacy policy.
Currently, that's not supported. That's something that we can certainly consider. And that's a good idea, actually.
Chris asks again, are we able to make our own components to be displayed in the content area, or are we limited to the smaller parts added with this framework? There are a few use cases that this would still require our own interviews.
Yeah, currently you're limited to using the items that are documented inside of your content areas. Again, that's a good future feature that we might consider.
Yeah, so we'll compile this list of feature requests. Again, from Chris, another question is are there plans to expand on the concept of color palette, maybe to a flexible theming system? So it's
Jeff, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear any shortcomings that you see from what we've provided with the existing color palette. You know, and I'd love to collect that feedback and see how we can make it more flexible in a future release.
Okay, so Chris is actually raising his hand, so I'm going to call on him to allow him to unmute himself, and he can add some color there verbally.
Sure.
Hey, So I think more, it's not that I see a deficiency or anything like that in the current one. I think I was comparing to, I think back in the SG1 day, or the SDK1 days, that there was a concept of a theme manager. And a lot of us have a desire to be able to theme our application, right? Say even like a dark mode to a light mode. That's very, very hard to do. But something like a color palette, if expanded upon correctly, might be something that we may be able to just swap a palette and the app potentially change its theme, as an example of kind of what I was going for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some kind of ways you can sort of do that now using the global node, where you could put, an AA with a bunch of color values in the global node, and then all of your own nodes could use them. Doesn't really help in some cases, and it's a lot of work to do. I believe that you could probably create a subclass of the RSG palette node and add your own app palette colors to it, and then set it on your scene, and then any of your nodes could get to it. So that would be kind of a step along the path of what you're asking for, I think.
Cool. Chris, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to respond with that.
I think I get the idea. I think this is one of those ones that would expand into a larger topic. Mm-hmm. But almost, because of the issue right now with anything being in global or scene is the entire app needs to watch to reflect that change. Where if it was something at a more system level, then that could happen on a redraw, essentially, rather than every single observer in the app having to react at once to the palette change, which is the bigger issue, right?
Yeah, I understand. And the nodes that support the RSG palette do kind of watch the palette and respond automatically to changes. So it's a good idea to extend this.
Yeah, I'll take that note and follow it. That's a good one.
Yeah, and Chris definitely knows how to reach me too. So Chris, if you do want to write up a request around this, I can pass that over to the team too, just so they have that formalized.
Sweet.
Okay, cool. So the next question is from Bishal, and it's effectively asking if there's any way to show two dialogues at the same time.
Well, right now there's not. Jeff, do you have any comments about two dialogues at the same time?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a use case as to why you might want to do that, other than just doing, a card type layout, like repurposing the dialogue for some sort of card type layout. Typically we have some, design principles at Roku where we try to keep one screen for one purpose, and so that's why the dialogue is effective for us, right? We try to give you one step at a time to help you complete your task, and we design the dialogue really to meet that case. So I don't think there's a technical way, Jim.
Yeah, currently we definitely enforce one dialogue at a time. If you show another dialogue, I believe it dismisses the current dialogue.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
Right. Okay. The next question is from Paul Voco. Sorry, I always have such a hard time with your last name, Paul. I don't know why. The question is, does it support horizontal layout of the bottom buttons, removing lines between title and content area, other text alignments for title?
Currently, we don't support any of these. Part of it is because we're trying to make things more standard. So we don't really want people to have dialogues that look different than the Roku OS standard.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that was the goal for us with the project is to just have all those things look similar, so then that way you get a consistent experience across the platform.
Right, and if you adopt your channel to use the dialogues, then you'll look like you're more integrated into the whole Roku OS.
Okay. The next question here is whether there are analytics or focus protections built into the standard dialogue.
There are none that I know of. Analytics, like when the dialogue is shown or things like that. And I'm not sure what focus protection means.
Right. Daniel, I think this might be a good one. If you want to raise your hand, you can elaborate a bit. Yeah. So you can go ahead and unmute your audio. The floor is yours.
Hi, I'm just wondering, when the dialog show up, does anything else will still focus? I guess you mentioned that if we pop into the dialog, it will knock it out. But if we set focus on something else in the background, will it still focus from it?
The dialogue will always have the focus over anything in the background. But when you dismiss the dialogue, whatever was focused before the dialogue was shown should continue to have focus, unless your dialogue changed it.
Okay. The next question is from Chris. He's asking, does this new dialogue system suffer from the same issue as the old dialogues, where if you change what dialogue is being shown without waiting for the old one to be closed, and the new one does not get shown? So I think this is kind of the same question around whether or not one dialogue would be dismissed.
Yeah, the behavior is going to be exactly the same. The system that controls the dialogue, what dialogue is shown and stuff, is shared between the old dialogues and the new dialogues. I thought that it was if you showed the new dialogue, the old one, it dismissed the old one. But it's possible. It's been a while since I looked at that. It's going to behave the same way as it did before.
Okay, so there you go, Chris. So the next question is from Steve Keen. He's asking, probably more appropriate for the voice panel earlier, but what was the reasoning behind adding new keyboard and pin dialogues that support voice instead of updating the existing components to support voice?
The main reason was that the keyboard components themselves are different. We used to have the keyboard node. Now we have the dynamic keyboard node that, in addition to supporting voice, also supports more flexible key layouts and things. So it wasn't as simple as just going back to the old dialogue and adding voice support.